We could get started on the introduction so we have lots of time. So hi everybody, welcome to our second Judy Slee seminar series, which focuses on student projects in the school. We're very lucky to have 3 of our great RSP students talking today. And then we also have our seminar area leads, Narisha and Neve, introducing everyone today. So I'll hand over to Michaela and then you'll hear more from Narisha and Neve today.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining the Psychology Seminar Series. Just a few housekeeping rules. Just a reminder that this seminar is being recorded and will be available on the Psychology YouTube playlist. Questions are welcomed and you can, questions are welcomed and can be asked via the Q&A function or by raising your hand. If raising your hand, you'll be invited to unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now hand off to our theme convener, Neve Campbell and Narisha Brown.
So hi everyone, thanks again for joining us. So today is our second graduate research seminar, and we have 3 speakers today, Cassidy, Mary and Shanthi. So our first speaker is Cassidy Shaw, and Cassidy is a second-year clinical PhD student here at the RSP. Her PhD research investigates male body image concerns with a specific focus on muscle dysmorphia and its distinctiveness from other common disorders. And she's supervised by Dr Kristen Murray, Liz Rieger and Bruce Christensen. So Cassidy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Narisha. I'll just share my screen now. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Yes? Okay, I'll make a start. All right, so thanks for joining us today. My name's Cassidy. So as Narisha said, I'm in the second year of my clinical PhD, and today I'll be talking about my research so far on muscle dysmorphia. So male eating disorders, are they really a concern? Well, clinically, it sort of says that we should be paying a little bit more attention to this than what we actually are, with males accounting for approximately 1 in 4 pre-adolescent eating disorder presentations and representing up to 50% of all eating disorder cases in specialist settings. However, less than 1% of all eating disorder and body image related research has focused strictly on male populations. So whilst males can experience the full range of eating disorders, what we're seeing more and more of are males trying to attain a more muscular physique, with 90% of college-aged men reporting this desire and many engaging in behaviours to accommodate this goal, so often changing their diet or engaging in synthetic substances, often steroids. So at a clinical level, this is known as muscle dysmorphia, which is the perception that one's body is insufficiently muscular or lean. So it's kind of that double-edged sword there where they're trying to attain a muscular physique, but also a lean physique, which is characterized by low body fat percentage. Females can experience this disorder as well, but it currently disproportionately affects males. So to provide a brief history of muscle dysmorphia, the disorder wasn't actually always known as muscle dysmorphia. In fact, it was first termed reverse anorexia or bigorexia in 1993 by Pope and colleagues. Basically, Pope and colleagues interviewed a range of bodybuilders and weightlifters and developed this proposed diagnostic criteria. So some of the symptoms that they noticed in these men were that they had significant distress or impairment in their social and occupational functioning. They would often give up important social, occupational, recreational activities due to their excessive workout schedules or diets. They often avoided situations where their body was exposed. They had a preoccupation about the inadequacy of their body size or musculature, and they would have quite excessive workout and diet schedules, and they would continue to follow these as well as use substances despite knowing the adverse effect of these. However, 4 years later, Pope and colleagues had a change of heart and they renamed the disorder muscle dysmorphia so that it was synonymous with a body dysmorphic disorder classification. And if you're anything like me, you might be a bit confused from what something seemed like an eating disorder, now body dysmorphic disorder. And that's where it's currently placed in the DSM-5, is under body dysmorphic disorder. But the reason for this shift was that Pope believes eating disorders are actually a form of body dysmorphic disorder because they both involve a preoccupation with appearance, which sparked a lot of controversy and debate within the research as well. Further to this, what we're now seeing in 2021 is that no one's actually using Pope's original criteria. In fact, what is being used is under body dysmorphic disorder in the DSM-5, you'll see there's just a one-line specifier for muscle dysmorphia, and it's simply just the definition of the disorder. So you don't have the criteria or kind of checklist that you do for other disorders to go off when you're making an assessment, treatment, or diagnosis for this particular disorder. We're also seeing implications in terms of the research, with a meta-analysis revealing that no muscle dysmorphia studies have actually used the DSM-5 criteria in their research. A lot of them refer back to Pope's original criteria, or they've even developed their own criteria and core symptomology to go off. So there's currently two issues. Firstly, the DSM-5 criteria is really vague, which has implications for clinical settings, but also in our research as well. And we're also seeing what I like to call a classification crisis. So because of that initial shift from an eating disorder now to body dysmorphic disorder, there's a lot of debate surrounding where muscle dysmorphia is most appropriately classified. So much debate that the most recent revision of the International Classifications of Disease doesn't actually include muscle dysmorphia as a disorder in their manual. So there's a lot of debate out there. So given that, where should muscle dysmorphia be classified? Well, currently there's three top contenders. So in first place, we've got body dysmorphic disorder, seeing as that's where it's currently sitting in the DSM. In second place, an eating disorder diagnosis, and in third place, obsessive compulsive disorder. So I'll have a look at the evidence and arguments for each of these three disorders. So starting off with OCD, the main argument for muscle dysmorphia being placed within this category is that, similar to OCD, muscle dysmorphia has obsessive and compulsive features specific to exercise and diet. We see people with anorexia creating quite rigid exercise and diet rules. The counter argument to this is that exactly that eating disorders have these rigid rules around exercise and diet. However, eating disorders like anorexia are not subsumed under OCD diagnosis. They're recognised for their similarities, but considered two distinct disorders. So perhaps that isn't the best fit. If we have a look at body dysmorphic disorder, so the main argument for muscle dysmorphia being placed under this category is that the preoccupation with perceived insufficient muscularity in muscle dysmorphia is seen to be equivalent to the perceived unobservable flaws in body dysmorphic disorder. However, a counter argument to this is that people with anorexia also have a perceived flaw of being overweight that is often unobservable to others, yet anorexia is not subsumed within a body dysmorphic disorder category. And the reason for that is under the body dysmorphic disorder criteria in the DSM, point 4, states that the primary focus is not related to body fat or weight, as is in an eating disorder. Similar to eating disorders, muscle dysmorphia also has a lot to do with body fat and weight. Males with this particular disorder tend to set particular weight goals or levels of body fat to attain to as well, because remember, muscle dysmorphia is trying to achieve a muscular physique, but also a lean physique, which is characterized by a low body fat percentage. So perhaps this distinguishing criteria should extend to include muscle dysmorphia as well. So that begs the question, is muscle dysmorphia an eating disorder? So a lot of the evidence points to that this is the best fit. So firstly, there's preliminary evidence to suggest that, similar to eating disorders, muscle dysmorphia also has this contingency of self-worth that's based on shape and weight. So there's those similarities there, but this contingency of self-worth on shape and weight is believed to be a core underlying feature of eating disorders. So if muscle dysmorphia shares that feature as well, that really points us in the direction of considering it to be an eating disorder. Similar to how females exaggerate male preferences of thin women in anorexia and restrictive eating disorders, we're seeing males with muscle dysmorphia exaggerating female preferences of muscular men, sometimes up to 13 kilos more of muscle mass than the average male. We're also seeing people pay excessive attention to diet, with some trying to consume 5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which if sustained for a long period of time could result in renal malfunction. So we're seeing physical consequences of these symptomology as well. Another thing to note is that they're related in terms of time, with 29% of men with muscle dysmorphia reporting a previous eating disorder diagnosis, often anorexia. And if we look at this through the lens of the transdiagnostic model of eating disorders, that model really recognises that it's quite common to have a shift from one diagnosis to another. So we're seeing this in the muscle dysmorphia space as well. So it's enough for me to say that this is the best fit. We need more research to back this up. So that's where my research program comes in, which is really to appease this classification crisis and develop a clinical picture of muscle dysmorphia. And to do that, I'll be distinguishing its features from similar disorders to really improve that assessment and treatment of muscle dysmorphia. So my first study is looking at to what extent muscle dysmorphia can be distinguished from the other 3 disorders, which all share quite similar features. So to do this, I'm administering a survey which measures the symptom severity of all 4 disorders to males aged 18 to 30. And then from there, I'll conduct a confirmatory factor analysis or structural equation model to compare 4 measurement models. So because this is the statistical analysis I'm using, I need about 500 males to do that. And I've got about 120 so far from my community and SONA sample. So I'll talk you through the models quickly. So the first model that I'll be looking at will be testing whether the muscle dysmorphia and eating disorder items load onto the same latent variables. And I'm hoping this first model provides the best model for indices, as I really do think that muscle dysmorphia fits within an eating disorder category. The second model will be looking at the model whereby muscle dysmorphia and OCD items load onto the same latent variables. And I think this will provide poor model fit indices, as I think they're 2 distinct constructs or disorders. My third model will be looking at the model whereby muscle dysmorphia and body dysmorphic disorder items load onto the same latent variables, and will this provide poor model fit indices? And I think that will be the case, as I think once again they're 2 distinct disorders. Then the final model we'll be looking at, well, maybe muscle dysmorphia doesn't fit under any of these umbrellas, perhaps it's its own distinct disorder. So this model would provide the best model fit indices if that were to be the case. Yeah, so that's all from me. As I said, I've got about 120 survey responses so far, but once I've got my data and results, it'll be really interesting to see which model provides the best fit indices and go from there. But my email's there if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Cass, for that great presentation. So now we'll just open the floor up to any questions. So feel free to put your hand up or pop them in the Q&A, and we'll just wait for some to roll in. Well, I guess I had one question for you.
Yeah, sure.
So when I was looking at your methods, you mentioned that there were kind of 5 scales for, was it muscle dysmorphia? But there was only kind of 1 scale for all of the other disorders. Why was that the case?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So basically, because we don't really have an idea yet of what muscle dysmorphia is, because there's no, I guess, criteria within the DSM-5. We've only got Pope's original criteria to go off. So to get a good understanding and picture of muscle dysmorphia, there are standardized scales that measure it, but they don't cover off all of Pope's original criteria. So I had to go and find lots of different scales that covered off each of his criteria. So in fact, I needed 5 to be able to measure the construct fully. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Hi, Cassidy.
Hi.
So I was just wondering, where do you think this kind of pressure to be, you know, really lean and have big muscles, I suppose, is coming from for these men? You know, where is it? Is there anything in the literature about that, like where it stems from?
Yeah, great question. I think it largely comes from, I guess, social media and how, I guess, portrayals of an average man have sort of changed over time. You know, in movies, they're becoming more muscular, in video games, once again, more muscular. Every kind of, social media platform, that's the sort of trend that we're seeing. Similar to how, I guess, we saw for females, you know, the ideal woman became thinner and thinner and thinner with modeling and in movies and social media again. So I think it's a similar thing that's happening. It's just not recognized as well that it's happening in the way that it was for females. I think we're still sort of working towards that. Similar to how, I guess, in like the body positivity movement, that's very female dominated. We don't see many males in that space yet. So I think we've just got a long way to go in recognizing that this is an issue similar to how restrictive eating in females became recognized. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think we're just sort of a bit delayed in terms of recognizing eating disorders in males.
No, it definitely does. Great work and great presentation as well.
Thank you.
Okay, well, on that note, I may as well move on to the next speaker, which is Mary Jiang. So Mary is a second-year research PhD candidate at the RSP, supervised by Dr Eryn Newman and Amy Dahl. From the time of her honours here at ANU, her work has focused on examining cognitive truth biases in the context of social factors such as prior beliefs and attitudes. So take it away, Mary. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Neve. So as Neve has just introduced, my name is Mary, and thank you everyone for coming to this seminar. I'm really glad to be here today to share some of my research. So my research mainly looks at bringing areas of cognitive and social psychology together to answer more applied questions. And today I will be presenting a study that focuses on prior beliefs, or the beliefs and attitudes that people hold towards certain topics, and investigating kind of the role of those prior beliefs in the cognitive truth effect. So kind of to set the ground for why I am looking at this question, when we consider the amount of claims that are being spread around social media in the current era, there's really an abundance of information, whether it is factually true or false. Here's an example of a claim that was actually spread around Twitter at least 24,000 times. When you think about claims like these, then you might ask, or you might be wondering, whether the retweets and repetition of this particular type of claim, whether this is dangerous for people who might be kind of induced to believe in these false claims just because they are repeated. And another question that might come up is, what about when we account for prior beliefs? So for people who already believe that global warming is happening, or maybe they align with beliefs of this claim, Would repetition of this claim act differently for those different types of people? These questions that I want to ask fit with current work in the literatures of the truth effect and motivated reasoning, which I will go explore in detail later. Each of these look at an aspect of what might happen when controversial claims such as this one are repeated. To begin with, the truth effect, or the illusory truth effect, is a robust cognitive bias in assessments of truth, which can make claims seem more true when they're repeated, even for false claims or lies. The standard truth effect has two main phases. First, an exposure phase, where people are exposed to one group of claims. Then after a retention interval, people undergo a test phase, where they're asked to rate the perceived truth of a group of claims, half of which they have seen before in the exposure phase, and half of which are new. Normally, we refer to those repeated claims as repeated, and the new ones as new claims. The truth effect, then, is the finding where repeated claims are generally rated as more true than new claims by comparing the mean truth ratings on a 1 to 6 Likert scale, with 6 being more true. Most theoretical accounts of the truth effect explain the link between repetition and truth through processing fluency, which is the feeling of how easy it is to process a claim. Now, repeated claims are, or they feel easier to process because people have seen them before. This increases the cognitive fluency, and this increase in fluency is linked to truth. Now, the illusory truth effect has been found for a wide range of claims, except for claims where participants already hold strong prior beliefs, such as the one we visited before. There's currently a gap in the truth effect literature for what might happen when you repeat these types of controversial claims. And here is where we come to the social side of this question of what might happen when you repeat controversial claims. Motivated reasoning is a finding in social psychology where people reason in ways to arrive at desired conclusions, no matter if the conclusion is accurate or not. So their main goal is their motivations and not accuracy. When we think about the controversial claims then, people might see two different types of claims, and they include ones that are consistent with people's prior beliefs and ones that are inconsistent. Motivated reasoning finds that people's reasoning depends on which types of claim that they're seeing. They may engage in a confirmation bias when they see belief consistent claims to select and agree with the claims that support their own prior beliefs. On the other hand, they will engage in a disconfirmation bias for those belief inconsistent claims. And this helps them to reject those claims, in turn, again, supporting their prior beliefs. When we think about the literatures of motivated reasoning and the truth effect, they can help us answer the question of what will happen when we repeat controversial claims. The truth effect will predict that repetition increases perceived truth. But when we consider motivated reasoning, people believe in things that support their own prior beliefs. So we would expect that the increase in perceived truth from repetition may be moderated by what type of claims that people are seeing. This expected result is shown in this graph here, where we have the expected mean truth ratings of each claim type. So there are two key findings here that we would expect. First, belief inconsistent claims on the left should receive lower ratings in general than belief consistent and innocuous claims, or the belief unrelated claims. Second, when we look at the size of the truth effect, which is the difference between the repeated and new bars, The truth effect should be smaller or even non-existent for belief inconsistent claims, because people should be rejecting these claims based on motivated reasoning. In order to test this hypothesis, I looked at the main question of whether claim type could moderate the truth effect. And to do this, I needed claims which represented opposite beliefs and attitudes towards a topic. And I chose the topic of climate science because people, there are people who are polarized in beliefs towards climate science. In my sample, overwhelmingly, most of them were pro-climate science. This meant that for the belief consistent claims, I had scientist claims, so claims that aligned with views of a climate scientist, and they were consistent with the beliefs of most of my sample. For the opposite ones, I had skeptic claims, or claims that aligned with views of someone who is skeptical that climate change was actually happening and human caused. And these served as the belief inconsistent claims in my study. I also had weather claims. They were innocuous and kind of just like the trivia claims that truth effect studies would normally use, unrelated to belief in climate science. Now, importantly, all the claims were piloted so that they were all ambiguous. People were not really sure if they were true or false, even though we included both true and false claims in our study. And we also piloted the perceived alignment, which meant that people could easily identify if the claim was a scientist claim or a skeptic claim. In my study, participants first filled out a prior beliefs and attitudes in climate science survey. And this helped me to find that 92.3% of my sample were pro-climate science. After the belief scales, I ran a typical truth effect test. So we have the two main phases at exposure and test. And as you can see, these phases included all the claim types. And at test, people were asked to rate or give their perceived truth of all the claims, half of which they have seen before in the exposure phase and half of which are new. Essentially, claim type and repetition were two within subject's variable. To answer the question of whether claim type moderated the truth effect, I ran a repeated measures ANOVA and also linear mixed models, which gave me the same results. If we turn to the graph here, this graph shows us the mean truth rating by claim type and also by repetition. Comparing between the claim type bars, people rated skeptic claims as less true than the scientist and weather claims, which was expected because our sample was mostly pro-climate science. Then turning to the truth effect, which is the difference between repeated and new bars, the weather claims on the right showed a truth effect, which was not surprising because truth effect studies have always used innocuous claims such as the weather ones. But then for the skeptic and scientist claims, people also showed a truth effect. And the size of the truth effect wasn't different across the claim types. These results together suggest that claim type does not moderate the truth effect. But we actually turned to another way of analyzing these results. So not just looking at the size of the truth effect, not just looking at the mean truth ratings, we looked at how many people actually experienced the truth effect. People were classified as having experienced a truth effect if their mean truth ratings for repeated claims were higher than the mean truth ratings for new claims. And then comparing the proportions of people who experienced a truth effect across claim type, we found that less people experienced a truth effect for skeptic claims compared to the other two claims. So less people experienced truth effect for belief inconsistent claims than belief consistent or innocuous weather claims. Overall, our results show that claim type did not moderate the size of the truth effect, but less people showed a truth effect for skeptic claims. There are some theoretical interpretations of these results. So one being that people may not have realized which side the claims aligned with, like if they were aligning with scientists or the skeptic sides. But we did find a truth bias for scientist claims in our pro-climate science sample, which means that it suggests people did realize the claim alignment manipulations. And as I just skipped to the follow-up, next, after experiment 1A, we are planning experiment 1B, where we will be refining these claims, having them kind of checked by a climate scientist and also check for face validity. And we're also looking at another belief scale, which should help us to take a closer look at the nuance between endorsers of climate science and give us more understanding of whether or not motivated reasoning plays a role in the truth effect. In the future, after this experiment 1 series on just looking at prior beliefs and the truth effect, we're also planning some other variations that look at these two variables together. So in experiment 2 series, we're looking to possibly prime social identities. And we expect that with the priming of social identities, there should be an enhanced effect of motivated reasoning, if there is one. In experiment 3, we're hoping to draw from some prior research that has looked at judging the claims in a context where people know that they will be seeing true and false claims. So in this context, it has been found that people experience a smaller truth effect. So using kind of the prior beliefs paradigm that we've got currently, I'm hoping to see whether using claims that really threaten people's prior beliefs may also put them or give them this context where they know they will be seeing true and false claims, and whether or not that may lead to a smaller truth effect. So in conclusion, our results showed us that the truth effect is robust to which type of claims that people see, but there is some evidence that claim type might moderate the proportion of people who experience the truth effect. This research will fill a gap in the illusory truth effect literature because we have little understanding of how beliefs and attitudes, like these social factors, may play a role in the cognitive biases. And this research in an applied way will help us to understand the most effective ways of science communication. Because if repetition makes us believe in a claim more, whether or not the claim is in line or against our prior beliefs, that means we need to focus most importantly on stopping misinformation being spread around, such as the claim we saw over here. So although the claims that I used in my study are more plausible than this statement, so far it looks like we should be very worried about false information that's being spread around social media. And we never know when we ourselves might be misled by the truth effect to believe in false information. Right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. Great presentation. So now we're going to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat function, or you can raise your hand so that Mary can answer your questions. Do we have any questions to kick it off?
I guess I have a question. It was a great presentation, Mary. I was thinking along the lines of like other kind of contexts where there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of kind of conspiracies. And I was wondering, are you planning on testing in a kind of different misinformation context? Like, for example, maybe testing claims about like vaccinations or COVID or something along those lines?
Yep, thanks, Narisha. We've definitely thought about that because with all the theory that I've presented, it's not just for beliefs in climate science, and it should generalize to beliefs in any controversial topic. So we would expect that if we tested beliefs in vaccination, we should be getting the same results. What we are planning now is to just finish the replication experiment of 1A. And then in the future, we might think about doing some replications with beliefs in other topics, like you've suggested.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll be excited to see that eventually down the track.
I think, Zwan, have you raised your hand?
Yes, I have.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nay. Hi, Mary. I've got a quick question about when I think it's you have done a very interesting presentation, and which made me thought about what happened in my life. And when I encounter some claims that are counterintuitive or I intuitively judge to be false, in that case, because I have the power of switching channels, or actually just delete this, jump into a different website, I shut down the information that I deem to be false or is not appealing to me. So what do you think about people's behavior when you have quite a lot of power in deciding what information that you are going to intake? Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You've just given a really good example of the disconfirmation bias, where you see something that isn't what you previously believed, or it might challenge your prior beliefs, and then you would choose to just shut the page or not look at it in order to arrive at a conclusion of supporting your prior beliefs. I think it's expected that you are doing that, and probably every one of us will be engaging in some sort of bias when we look at information that is related to our prior beliefs, whether it supports or challenges our prior beliefs. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you recognize that you are doing that. And I guess my research kind of takes it one step further to look at how these everyday behaviors that we have kind of combine, or how it plays out when we look at cognitive biases such as the truth effect.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Try to be, if I'm being more explicit, what I'm implying was that if it is something that doesn't really, at the first glance, sounds right, you probably don't have the chance for me to get the repetition in me, because I'm already switching channels, or I'm already switching from, let's say, channel 9 to ABC. And then I won't be looking at those sources that you would hope that to convince me into getting more exposure to.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying now. So you're saying that people probably wouldn't be repeatedly exposed to belief inconsistent information because they choose to not even look at it. Would that be right? Yeah, that is a really good point. I think that's even more applied than what my study is designed to look at. Yeah, it's an interesting idea that I'll think about.
Thank you, and good luck with your PhD.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'm kind of just thinking one thing, and I'm just going off a whim here. So I noticed that you put your attitudes and beliefs questionnaire first. And I was just wondering, while I saw that kind of setup of your design, if you think that that may have, like, in any way possible, have primed because, you know, you had a really high percentage of pro-climate science. And I was wondering if that may have, like, primed your participants as well already in this experiment, having that beliefs and attitudes about climate science first, prior to...
Yeah, that's a really good observation. So having that first would definitely be a type of prime, like you've suggested. And we actually did want it to be first so that people's own beliefs could be on their minds or kind of more salient when they're viewing these claims. So hopefully, if their prior beliefs are on their mind, the claims will seem even more like scientist or skeptic when they view them, to hopefully bring out the largest, like, moderating effects that we could see. So given that we did all we can to prime their own beliefs, but we still didn't find the moderation effect, I think that just tells us maybe this isn't the best way to look at this effect, or this effect is just very small, hard to find.
Yeah. I was also thinking, this was just in my own head, like, is it possible that I don't know, I've never used MTurk before, so I'm not really sure, but the people who are using MTurk, I would kind of assume, and this is just an assumption, but that they would be, like, more believing in science because they're more willing to engage, like, they're engaging in science, like, by being a participant, like, voluntarily. So yeah, do you think that would have any impact? Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
thinking
well, MTurk is quite similar to, like, you know, your actual population. So it has generalizability in that sense. But yeah, people have seen that MTurk samples are generally more believing of science.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
Even given, like, our pro-climate science sample, we could still look at, like, belief consistent and belief inconsistent claims and see what happened there. So I think it's definitely possible to look at another, to sample from somewhere else if we wanted to get that, you know, divide in beliefs.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Thank you, Mary. Yeah. So now we're going to move on to our third and final speaker. So Shanthi Kumarage is a second-year PhD candidate from the Language Acquisition Department, Max Planck Institute of Psycholinguistics. She researches how young children process and acquire syntax. She's currently working from the ANU and is supervised by Associate Professor Evan Kidd and Professor Caroline Rowland. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just share my screen and get started. All right. So thank you everyone for coming today. And today I'll be presenting the first project of my PhD, which is a longitudinal investigation of children's early syntactic representations. So syntax is a crucial feature of human language, which children must acquire in order to become skilled communicators. And syntax governs the structures in language that words can make up, and the relational information between those words. So in English, we have subject, verb, object, word order. So the dog bit the man means that the dog did the biting rather than the man. And researchers agree that once children have acquired their native syntax, they can use language creatively to form sentences that aren't just an imitation of their language input, And that means that they have to have abstract rules of syntax which operate over categories of words like verb and noun, rather than just over the words themselves. So while that's agreed on, a key theoretical debate in language acquisition research is how children get to that destination. And there's two main competing accounts. So the nativist account originated with Chomsky, who proposed that children come to language learning with substantial innate knowledge of syntax, which he called universal grammar. And modern nativist approaches share that key assumption that children have innate knowledge of syntax. In contrast, emergentist approaches assume that children can learn syntactic representations using domain general mechanisms. So one of these accounts is the implicit learning account, wherein syntactic representations are gradually abstracted over time with language experience and input. So one way we can test the nature and development of syntactic representations is structural priming. And this is a phenomenon wherein processing a particular syntactic structure, such as the passive, increases the frequency of the use of that structure later on. So in the example on my slide, the girl and the boy are watching TV, and the boy describes the scene on the TV using a passive. The turtle was kissed by the elephant. And then in the next scene, the girl uses a passive to describe the scene instead of an active. So she says, the duck was carried by the sheep rather than the sheep carried the duck. And so in an experimental setting, we present participants with a scene which the experimenter describes, and that's the prime. And then we present them with another scene which they have to describe, and we call that the target. So we can vary the content that is shared between prime and target in order to test the nature of the representations that are tapped by priming. So if the prime and the target use the same verb, so like in the bottom row where they both have kiss, if children produce a passive in the target, so if they're primed, then we only know that they have a representation of the passive for that particular verb, so for kiss. So that would be lexically specific knowledge. But if they're primed in trials where the prime and the target have a different verb, so kiss for the prime and carry for the target, if they show a priming effect there, that indicates that they have abstract syntactic knowledge, which is shared across verbs. And we call that the abstract priming effect. So our two main approaches to syntactic acquisition invoke different mechanisms of priming. So the residual activation mechanism proposes that shared representations between the prime and the target verb are activated when the prime is heard, and then that means that representation is more accessible for use in the target, and so then children are more likely to produce a passive. And that's invoked by the nativist account. Under the implicit learning account, the primes act as input for online syntactic learning, and the priming effect shows the effect of children updating their syntactic representations during the task, and that's invoked by the emergentist implicit learning account. And so this means that our two theories make different predictions about how the abstract priming effect develops. So the nativist account predicts that because representations are innate, and simply temporarily activated in priming, we shouldn't see any change in the abstract priming effect over time, and there also shouldn't be much variability between different children. Whereas the implicit learning account predicts that as children's representations of syntax become more stable, the small amounts of input that they receive during a priming task will have less influence, and we'll see a smaller priming effect over time. Because their representations are also developing, we'll also see variability between children in priming. In terms of the current literature, we only have cross-sectional studies of priming at the moment. And so those have shown varying results. Some show increasing priming effects, some show decreasing, some show stable. So it's still unclear, and we really need a longitudinal study in order to test that claim. In terms of variability, we usually look at the average priming effect across the whole sample, and so it hasn't really been tested yet whether children show variability in priming. So the present study is the first longitudinal investigation of priming over development, and children completed the priming task as part of the Canberra Longitudinal Child Language Project, which tracks 124 children from 9 months to 5 years. Children completed the task every 6 months from 3 years old to 4.5, and so we have 4 different time points. And to make the task more engaging for children, we did it as a snap game. So for each trial, the experimenter turns over their card and describes the picture, and then the child does the same thing. And so that's the prime and then the target. And in between each of our trials, we had a pair of intransitive filler pictures, and every now and then those would be the same picture for the experimenter and the child gets to race to snap the cards and win them. So the experimenter followed a script which varied whether the prime was active or passive, and whether the verb between prime and target was matched or unmatched. And today I'm just looking at those unmatched trials. And we then coded children's responses as active or passive after the task. So turning to the results, so this graph shows the proportion of passive responses after active and passive primes, at each time point. And what we found is that at every time point, children produced more passives after a passive prime than after an active prime. So they have abstract syntactic knowledge of the passive even from 3 years old. What we saw was that while children's passive production increased over time, so they produced more passives overall, the difference between passive primes and active primes remained stable over development. So we didn't see an increase in the abstract priming effect, we saw that it was stable. However, this is a little bit unusual because the active trials essentially were our baseline, and in natural speech, passive production is about 0.1%, but by 4.5 years old, after active primes, children were producing nearly 20% passives. So there could be 2 explanations for this. The first is simply test-retest effects, which are unavoidable in longitudinal studies. But another explanation is that we're seeing an increase in abstract priming, but rather than the priming occurring only after each trial, it's cumulative. So children may be producing passives after later active primes because of an accumulation of earlier passive primes. And there's some evidence in the literature that this could be the case. Children can show priming even when 2 sentences intervene between the prime and the target. And there's also evidence that children showed more priming towards the end of a task than the beginning of a task. If this is the case, then we're seeing an increase rather than a stable abstract priming effect. Now turning to individual variation, we saw that an increasing number of children were primed over time. So at 36 months, only less than 50% of children were primed, but by 4.5 years old, more than 75% of children were showing priming. We then looked at whether we could predict which children were primed at 36 months. So at 30 months, 6 months earlier, as part of the longitudinal study, we had measures of children's vocabulary and their grammar, grammatical complexity. And so what we found is that their language proficiency predicted whether they were primed at 36 months, which suggests that this individual variation is not just random, but systematic and related to children's linguistic knowledge. So in summary, we have tentative evidence for an increase in abstract priming over development. However, future studies will need to take into account this cumulative priming and maybe use more fillers in between each trial. And we have individual variation present in our sample, which is meaningful. So the implications for the theories, neither of these findings are consistent with the nativist approach. And that's because if we do have an increase in abstract priming, that suggests that priming is related to changing syntactic representations, and the nativist approach doesn't predict that we will see changes in syntactic representations over development. So these findings are not consistent with the implicit learning account completely, but they are consistent with an emergentist approach where syntactic representations do change over development. So one way that we could adjust the implicit learning account is to suggest that children won't even show priming until they have a representation of the passive, and until they have that, we'll see an increase in priming over development. And once they have it and it is simply becoming more stable, we might see that predicted decrease. So thank you very much for coming, and if you have any questions, let me know.
We have the question from Zuan again.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Shanthi. I actually have one comment and one question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
First is a comment. I haven't read the second reference of your of what you claim as a nativist, but Chomsky, in my impression of Chomsky's aspect of syntax, is that it talks about, say, for instance, if I may make an analogy in what the psychologists might be familiar with, is it's like saying, okay, we know that humans have this motion after effect, and this is the ability of having the motion after effect. It's something innate. It's an ability thing. It's not something about performance, not about what you are given there will induce this motion after effect. Or in other words, it feels to me that the innate theory of language ability says that, okay, children has the ability of generating those set of representations that you are testing. It's not about what exactly this what input will lead them to generate one type of representations rather than the other. And sorry, that was my comment. And actually my question, if I may, is I think that your study is interesting, and also I'm not quite sure. Are you familiar with the term unaccusative?
Like an ergative.
Yes, ergative and accusative, where
Yeah.
there. So in French, you will see the difference between avoir and être being used, and in German it's ist versus gehen, and then in some other languages you see there sometimes it's as well, the subject actually precedes the verb or it follows verb, depending on whether you have an accusative or agentive transitive sentences. So I would think that, I've just hypothesized that if, even no matter how much the structure priming you give a child, do you think that they will shift from être to avoir? They will shift from the structure they use for using agentive transitive into using an accusative in an accusative sentence.
So I don't know enough about those that particular grammar to fully understand your question. But what we would find is that the least frequent structures, so in English, passives are really infrequent structure, and they tend to be primed more than more frequent structures like the active. But yeah, there have been most of the studies are obviously in English, and most of them tend to be on passives and datives. But there have been a few in other languages.
And they're having quite a few. Yes, you're right. Yeah. In other languages.
Yeah,
and also in the reason why I bring up an accusative or an accusative and agentive transitive differences is there you will not claim that it's about input frequency, because we say the verb walk or moving towards or some type of work like that, verbs like that will occur quite often. Then you may have a neater design in the sense that you don't have the the input frequency that's affecting.
Yeah, so that's like when there are studies in the dative, so we're comparing like the boy gave the gift to the girl and the boy gave the girl a gift. So those are both very common, and they really only differ in their syntax, because the passive obviously is also about foregrounding the patient rather than the agent. For the dative, they're really interchangeable in meaning as well, and we still do.
Well, really, is there not a focus difference in terms of information focus differences?
It's, I guess, less emphasized with the dative than the passive, I would say.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, that's been a really interesting set of talks. Neve, shall I let you wrap things up so we make sure we stick to our time?
Yeah, I was just going to wrap things up. So thank you everyone for coming, who's still here. We've had a great semester this semester with our 6 speakers, sorry. If anyone wants to present next semester, we have 6 more spaces open. So please just contact myself or Narisha. Just remember that first years can present, even if you don't have results. You can do a research proposal or a literature review. That's also very appropriate. But otherwise, everyone have a great week, and thanks for coming today. Bye.
Thanks, Neve.